Shalom guys, welcome back to another episode here at Shavi Ministries with Kislev and Yarah. Today we're going to do something a little different. We're going to do a study and a teaching about Hanukkah. Why do we celebrate it? What is Hanukkah about? What is the definition of Hanukkah? And what is the purpose of this celebration, right? Many people do not celebrate it. Many people do, right? Many people think that it's not necessary to celebrate it. So we're going to understand a little bit, in this small teaching of the context of Hanukkah and what is the purpose and the meaning and where does it come from, okay? So let's get started. So Hanukkah is the feast of dedication, right? In Hebrew it says Chanukah, right? We title this the light of the world, right? So what is the feast of dedication? The Feast of Dedication was established as a memorial to the purification and rededication of the temple in Jerusalem in the Jewish month of Kislev 25 in the year 165 BCE, which took exactly 3 years to the date from its defilement, right? So the question arises, how was the temple defiled? So Antiochus Epiphanes, right, the king of Syria, had captured Jerusalem and plundered the temple treasury. And to make it worse, he profaned the temple by sacrificing a pig to Zeus in the temple altar. His attempt to Hellenize Judea resulted in what is known as the revolt of the Maccabees. So, Antiochus Epiphanes, right, he was a king, right, that of Syria that inherited, right, his throne, and so he decided to take over Egypt, right? He destroyed Egypt's kingdom, right? The king of Egypt, right, fled and left his people, and on his way, he then came into Israel, Jerusalem, and desecrated the temple, took all the treasury, the menorah, everything that was inside the temple, and he profaned it, right? And so he started to establish his own law, right? And he started to establish his own status as God, right? He believed that he was over what the Israelites and the Jewish people believed to be authority, right, at the time in their land. And so he started defiling the temple, defiling God's sacred space. And so this is where the defilement of the temple comes into play into the Feast of Hanukkah. So after Antiochus Epiphanes, right, decides to destroy the temple, right, basically profane it, right, make it impure, and so the revolt starts to happen, right? A revolt was led by Mattathias, a Maccabee, and his 5 sons. The Israelites resisted and fought against the occupying Syrian army, and after 3 years, the Israelites defeated the Syrians and liberated the Jewish people. So Mattathias is from the priestly line, right? And so Mattathias saw what was going on to his people, understood that the desecration and the dishonor that was being given to Elohim, to his God, right, the God of his fathers, was not honorable, right? It was being a sign of disrespect by this king, right? And so Antiochus was trying to establish his own law, his own rules into the people, right, into the land of Israel, right? He had sacrificed a pig, put an image of himself, right? He was considering himself God, right? And his law was over the law of Elohim. And so it's very interesting that Mattathias, when he is approached by the soldiers, right, and in the incident, he says the following. Mattathias was facing the king's officers, right? And so, many from Israel came to them, right? And Mattathias, his sons were assembled. The king's officers spoke to Mattathias as follows, right? You are a leader, honored and great in this town, and supported by sons and brothers. Now be the first to come and do what the king commands, as all the Gentiles and the people of Judah and those that are left in Jerusalem have done. Then you and your sons will be numbered among the friends of the king, and you and your sons will be honored with silver and gold and many gifts, right? So here they're trying to bribe Mattathias into fulfilling the commands of the king and honoring the king's word. And so Matatias is going to give him an answer that is very profound and very deep. Even if all the nations that live under the rule of the king obey him and have chosen to obey his commands, every one of them abandoning the religion, right, of their ancestors, and my sons and my brothers will continue to live by the covenant of our ancestors, far be it from us to desert the law and the ordinances, right? We will not obey the king's words by turning aside from our religion to the right hand or to the left, right? So Matatias here is establishing that his honor, right, will stay with Elohim, right, and his ordinances and his laws, right. Here, the Antiochus and his army were destroying the Torah scrolls, right, the books of the covenant that describe Elohim's order and heart. And so he said he was going to stand for Elohim. And so the revolt starts with the attitude that they will honor Elohim at all times. It's established that they will honor Elohim at all times. And so before we keep going, there's a legend that is established by the Feast of Dedication, or that is connected to the Feast of Dedication, that many people might know about more than the real meaning, right? So Hanukkah in Hebrew means dedication, right? Hanukkah is it's thought by many people to be 8 days long because of the legend regarding the oil in the temple. The tradition says that when the Maccabees recaptured and rededicated the temple, they attempted to light the temple menorah, right? The menorah used to burn continually. The menorah represented the eternal light of Elohim, right, of God. The legend says that there was only oil for 1 day, and miraculously it lasted 8 days. But why the legend? Right, so why do they establish this legend, right? The legend probably developed during the Roman occupation, long after the events occurred, right? So why live and establish a legend and a story that had nothing to do with what happened, right? Something that the legend of the oil became popular in order to avoid the warlike aspects of the holiday, right? After all, celebrating the overthrow of your oppressors might be perceived as not politically correct by the Roman. So it is understood that the story of the oil, right, was established so that Israel, when they were being oppressed by the Romans and other armies, the other armies wouldn't see Israel celebrating the overthrow, right, of what they had done in the past to their enemies, right? And so to keep things peaceful, right, and to keep things in shalom, right, they prefer to celebrate it as a miracle story in which, there was oil in the temple and it was supposed to last 1 day, but it lasted 8 days, and that was the miracle. And so they celebrated it because of that and that miracle. But at the end of the day, the purpose of the story is so that they wouldn't create a problem with the Roman occupation at the time, which was when the story became more popular because Rome was oppressing Israel at the time. And so they were over Israel, and Israel was basically negotiating, right, the leadership and how they were going to run their kingdom, right, through Roman rule. So to keep the peace, the story of the oil became more popular. So we're going to keep digging through this story and understanding what is behind the Feast of Dedication. Right, so another historical reason for the 8 days, right, that is actually based on Sukkot, also known as the Feast of Booths, right? In 2 Maccabees chapter 10, verse 6 through 7 says, they celebrated it for 8 days with the rejoicing in the manner of the festival of booths, remembering how long before, during the festival of booths, they had been wandering in the mountains and caves like wild animals. Therefore, carrying ivy wreathed and wands and beautiful branches, also fronds of palms, They offer hymns and thanksgiving to him who had given success to the purifying of his own holy place. They decreed it by public edict, ratified by vote, that the whole nation of the Jews shall observe these days every year, and the Israelites. So, another connection of the 8 days, the 8 days of the dedication, right? They connected it to the Feast of Booths, right, of Sukkot, right? Because Sukkot was an 8-day celebration, right? 7 days, and then the 8th day is Simchat Torah. And so they connected it to 8 days as well because of the time where they were supposed to be celebrating and rejoicing on Sukkot. They were wandering, right, and still, battling for their freedom, right, and their ability to dedicate the altar and the temple to God. And so when they were able to do that in the time of Hanukkah, when they were able to dedicate the temple in the time of Hanukkah, they decided to connect Hanukkah to the Feast of Sukkot. And so that same energy that they will bring to Sukkot, they brought it to Hanukkah, and it became like a second Sukkot for them. The Feast of Sukkot was the most recent feast in the calendar when the temple was rededicated for the holy worship. Like Hezekiah later, right, the great Passover, Hanukkah was originally considered the second Sukkot for the victorious Israelite army. During the 8 days of Hanukkah, there is a menorah that is lit as well. The menorah, which is called a Hanukkah, has 9 candle holders rather than 7. 8 of the candles are lit for each night of Hanukkah, and the 9th is called the Hamash. Now, these candles are lit because it takes 7 days, and on the 8th day, an altar is dedicated, right? It takes 7 days for it to be purified, right, and prepared for a full and complete dedication on the 8th day, right? Hanukkah is a dedication, meaning that it is connected to the dedication of the altar, right? The Maccabees, in their honor, right, to represent Elohim, right, to represent his law and his covenant and his order, right? That attitude took them to establish Elohim's kingdom and Elohim's order, right, by rededicating the altar, right, to Elohim. Now, what does it mean to dedicate the altar to Elohim, right? Rededicating the altar to Elohim represents that Elohim is enthroned on earth and his authority is established, right? And so by them doing that, right, overthrowing Rome or the Assyrian army, right, they established that Elohim was the king and the sole ruler of their kingdom, right? And so they decided to overthrow, right, the heinous crimes of Antiochus, and they said, we're going to establish the one true king and the one true Elohim on earth. And so by them rededicating the altar and the temple, that's what they did, right? So Hanukkah in its essence is the rededication of Elohim's altar, or in a better definition, rededicating Elohim's honor on earth again. Okay, so let's keep reading. Right, the Hamash means the servant, right? So that middle candle that we see in the Chanukah, that is lit first and then after, with that middle candle, with the Hamash, with the servant candle, we light up each candle for each day, right, of Hanukkah, right? The servant candle, like I said, is lit first and then is used to light other candles each night. Now, is Hanukkah in the New Testament, right? Hanukkah is first mentioned in John 10, verse 22-23. Interestingly enough, it says, at the time, the Feast of Dedication, Hanukkah, took place at Jerusalem. It was winter, and Jesus, was walking in the temple in the colonnade of Solomon, right? Yeshua was teaching at the temple in Solomon's colonnade, right? Interesting, Yeshua teaches in the Feast of Dedication that faith in him is victory, right? Yeshua let us know that his redemptive work identifies with Hanukkah, right? So Yeshua's message, right, in the Feast of Dedication, right? Yeshua is celebrating this feast, and it's something that we need to understand. Yeshua is celebrating the Feast of Hanukkah in the winter, in Solomon's colonnade, which is in the temple precincts, right? And so, where Yeshua is an extension of the temple by Herod, right? But in this place, Yeshua is teaching, right, that through him is victory, right? In the Feast of Dedication, right? Coincidentally, Yeshua is trying to let the people know that yes, right, the Maccabees by force took over, right, and rededicated the kingdom, right, to Elohim. And so many people might say, well, yeah, they rededicated the altar and the kingdom, but then they, decided to establish themselves as kings, and they did many wrong things as well. And yes, you can say that. But what we're focusing on in the story of the Maccabees is more of the moral and the decision that they made to stand for Elohim, which is the most important part of the story, right? They decided to stand for Elohim. They fought for his honor and established his honor on earth, right? Now, Yeshua is giving us a different message, which says that not by force he's going to establish Elohim's honor, but by his humbleness and service to us, right? And by him showing us that justice and righteousness that he taught us in his example, he himself will give us a connection, not to the earthly altar like the Maccabees did, right? Which was great. They dedicated the altar, they rededicated the earth to Elohim, but the possibility of it profaning itself like it did, right, was higher. Now, Yeshua is giving us an opportunity to him purify with his blood, right, or give us access to the heavenly altar, which with his blood is eternally open, right, for us to repent and to draw near Elohim through Yeshua. Right, so Yeshua is giving us the victory that the Maccabees gave to their people at their time, but with an extension for eternity, right? And so Yeshua as the Chamash, right? The Maccabees cleansed the temple that it might be holy again to worship Elohim and his glory. Yeshua, in a sense, cleanses us from our sins, that we might be sacred temple for holy worship to the glory of Elohim, but to also have access to understand the holy temple and itself, and understand that when the altar is dedicated to Elohim, Elohim is enthroned on earth. This is my little quote here, guys. We are called to dedicate ourselves to restoring God's honor and live every day like he is enthroned in the heavens. For the Feast of Dedication, what do we have to have in mind? Right? Are we that dedicated servant? Are we that Hamash, like that middle candle that we use to light up the Hanukkah? Right? We're called to be a light to the nations. We're called to be a representation of Elohim's kingdom. Right? The Maccabees showed us that there has to be true power in our actions and faithfulness to our God. Many of us say that we believe in the God, but we never act on it. Our actions sometimes are more silent than our words. And so we need to start understanding that these 8 days of Hanukkah represent that we commemorate the time where the men of Israel, the believers of the law and the covenants, dedicated Elohim's honor to him again, that they were willing to change their status and whatever they believed in and establish Elohim's honor again on earth, right? And so what is the point to the 8 days, right? Are we going to dedicate not only ourselves, but are we going to dedicate Elohim and the earth to him again? And how do we do that? In our obedience and our consistency, right? The way that we live will dictate if the earth will be rededicated to Elohim. Hanukkah reminds us that not only that we're light to the nations, but that it takes 8 days to completely dedicate an altar, right? Hanukkah means dedication. 7 days, and on the 8th day is certified altar dedicated to Elohim. We're celebrating Elohim's enthronement on earth. We're commemorating it. Because one day it will come to pass that he will be enthroned on earth. And I really hope that you and me are doing the right thing to honor his word. So guys, have a great Hanukkah, a long and beautiful 8 days with your congregation, with your family. Light up that Hamash, that servant candle that represents our Messiah, and light up your Hanukkahs and commemorate and remember this. Understand that we are dedicating our altars, whether it be our body, our temple, or our homes, right? Honoring Elohim and honoring his word and the covenant that he made with our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, with Moses, with David, with Yeshua. Let's hold truth to our word, and let's act more than we speak. Have a happy Hanukkah, and have a great week. Shavuot Tov.